Okay, this is a demonstration of Levio approach to application modernization. So I'm going to share my screen. Am I sharing the right screen? Yes.
Yes.
By the way, this is going to be a PowerPoint demo for the sake of brevity. We did a similar demo for AWS showing really the code, but today my developer is not available. So I will skip the Levio introduction and go to what is that we want to present today. So today we are going to go through several steps. We'll start with some legacy code. Now the legacy code that we have found is COBOL, the example, and it's related to a financial application. That can be reused for any type of language conceptually and any type of industry or vertical. Ideally,
one thing it's important to mention is that COBOL code, it's a batch application.
Right.
Which will be converted into a non-batch application. Okay, that's important to understand.
Right, and we will go through the complete process. So the first thing that we will show is how we use AI to make sense of the COBOL. And apart being a batch application, keep in mind that COBOL is a non-object oriented language. Very often is written with spaghetti code, so it's very difficult to understand what is inside a application like that. And we use artificial intelligence to do that. Then we discover functions, namely, we try to understand, okay, we have imported into a model, but what is that really we need to align? We will go in detail of that. We design the interface by aligning with industry standards. We connect to ODA. ODA is the industry standard for telecommunication. In this specific example is a financial application. So we will use Accord, that is a industry model for insurance. Then we will design components. We generate the complete code of the component, including the fact that we have some business rules. So we'll generate also completely the business rule code and we will deploy it. So let's start, in the presentation. So that is the original COBOL code. So it's a COBOL program that fundamentally perform calculation for loans application. So a certain structure to all the loan information, and then couple of function to calculate the current loan and what is remaining to be paid. And is not a very long application, but that was in the public domain and has all the characteristic of a typical COBOL application. So the first step is we import that into the model. Now, what we do here is we use Spark's Enterprise Architect as a tool to manage our repository server. So within my tool, Spark's Enterprise Architect, I can flash a REST API, and that REST API will call the Levio Code Analyzer. So the Levio Code Analyzer will digest the legacy system, and part of this will be done with regular programming, trying to parse the legacy system. But especially for the business logic part of it, we send part of the code to ChatGPT by using the API, and we get back three different type of information. One is the structure of the code. So we need to represent this code as a set of domain classes. So for example, what is a domain class in the sense of the loan? The loan itself is a concept that is expressed as a identity with some properties. The second one is the behavior. We want to understand which kind of actions this code is doing. And then relationships, what is that is related a part of the code with another part of the code. So all of that is automated. And the result is that we have a COBOL PSM. Now, for the record, we are going to use these two terms very often in this presentation. PSM is a platform-specific model, and then we'll use another term called platform-independent model. So a platform-specific model is a model, but is still connected to the technology, and we will see what that means in detail. And a platform-independent model is a model in which we have extracted all the technology aspect out of it so that we only keep the so-called information.
You mind me asking a question throughout?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
no. Go.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Okay. So your LC, where does it reside? Let's say, is it on-prem, or do we have a repo on site at the client, or is it cloud, or where is it?
So the tool Sparks Enterprise Architect is a desktop application, but we use, if you see here, the repository server is located in the cloud, so we can collaborate on the cloud. And the LCA is a complete separate application that is also in the cloud, so it's providing services.
Okay, so we'll need to clear customer security if we want to. It's not going to be all clients that want that to be in the cloud, right? They might want to.
But though this is just for us, what the customers see, it's the model that's in Spark CA.
Okay.
Everything
I mean,
else
depending
So
from the
is
client.
not going to be operating the LCA?
No, we are
only
doing,
we?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. So what we
Just
need
to be
from the
clear,
customers, the
depending from
legacy
customer
code.
situation, we can install this thing locally on their machine. It's not,
Yeah.
we are not forced to use cloud to do this thing. You know,
Okay.
we can install everything on a desktop machine if
Yeah.
required. We
Yeah.
can, install like the model on the client side. That is also a matter of how we want to sell this thing.
Yeah.
Are we going to sell this thing as a service? Then maybe we host the cloud service. But today I would like to focus on the technology aspect, and then we can, brainstorm about how we package this for customer. But in
But
general,
there's no limitation what we
right.
can do, how we deploy and stuff like that.
We can deploy this
Just
thing in
not-
whatever fashion is
Some
necessary.
question.
Yeah. But what we need to get is the code from the customer. So that's the most important.
That's going to be the
Okay.
first hurdle.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Okay.
so let's
Sorry
continue in the
about that.
presentation. Now, that is one of the main achievements that we have done. So discover functions, and not simply discover functions, but represent functions in a way that any human, even a non-technical one, can understand. And then the same type of text we can reuse to regenerate, the code in any target language. Okay, so that is exactly what came out of the artificial intelligence. So we have two things: calculate loan and calculate present value. Calculate the present value of a series of cash flow. The function calculate the present value using provided interest rate and cash flow over specified number of period. Return a complete current value object containing the present value amount. Okay. As I said, you can read it, you can understand what that is about, but also a artificial intelligence, we will use it to generate the target code later in the demonstration. Now, that is the part of designing interface. So we know that this thing that we are doing is related to somehow to loan. So, and we want to understand how is loan defined in the industry. So what you're looking at right now is the loan definition of Accord that, as I said, is a standard for insurance. And as you see, is very comprehensive, and it's also very abstract. Okay, that is one of the perks, but also the downside of those industry models that are super comprehensive, but they are not always super practical. Okay, so in the next phase of the project, here we have on the top the PSM, so the model that we have directly imported from the code. And you see, for example, this is called COBOL because in the code was called COBOL. Okay, and then the way in which the property are structured, they were separated into different structure. So we have COBOL fields, and COBOL fields really contain all the fields here, and parameter is only containing parameter. So that is a construct of COBOL, and we don't need that in APIM. So the first thing that we do is we take all those property and we put in a class, and we rename it from COBOL to be loan, because we don't need COBOL, right? Now, the second thing that we do is we look for similarities between our current class and the industry model. So you see here we have a thing called agreement loan. And here we have this mapping. This mapping is also generated by artificial intelligence. This is something that we have done during the Pioneer Innovation Project with the TM Forum, because potentially you have thousands of those relationships. I don't know if you can read it, but you see here we have a property called...
So one thing that Antoine needs to understand, this is where we enhance the application with outside industry models to not just port the application, but to make it better. Okay, so
I have a question regarding that. I guess you've got your application analyzer, you put it into it, you get this output.
yeah,
There's going to be deltas. So
yes,
you validate it against the industry standard.
Yes.
There's going to be deltas. There's
Yes.
a reason why
yes.
code-wise it was different.
Yeah.
Also-
And Gio's gonna explain to you what we're doing to solve this problem.
I was coming to the other problem. There's deltas between, because of code,
Yeah,
the language, but
Yeah.
there's deltas that were business deltas.
Yes.
They were made there for that reason. So
Yeah.
I guess that the machine will identify both.
Yes.
And there's going to be
and,
ultimately.
and it's a matter of, let's say now this is what the application was doing, and this is maybe what you want to add to it.
Yeah.
So you take this step to order to do that.
Okay,
So you can add and extend.
There's still going to be a human
Yes,
decision.
yes, like he just did. He changed the name COBOL to loan. He changed the
Okay,
name.
here we have another example of exactly that. So what we're trying to do is look for similarity. So we have certain things that we miss. For example, clearly we don't have anything like annual interest rate percentage. It's completely missing here. But much more interesting is you see a loan amount. We have here a loan amount and we have here a loan amount. But the loan amount here is of a different type. This is a type of, property. That is the currency amount. And here is a double, okay? Then we have another case in which you see loan period. Here is called number of periods. It's the same thing, but here is a integer and here is a time period. That is a more expressive, property, okay? So we have different cases that we need to solve. So here we have the interest, and here is called annual interest. And again, here is a percentage, and here is a double. Okay, so we have different use cases here. We have use case in which it's exactly the same, and typically is the exception. Use case in which like the name is different. Use case in which the name is the same, but the type of property is different, and so on. So we need to solve all of that to have our final model. So what we have done here, we have decided not to use those types because they are more complicated. But for sure, we have decided to add two new properties that think about originally they were not even in the application. So we, like Michelle is rightly saying, we are not simply, lift and shift application. We are aligned with standards, porting, we can improve the application, and we keep the complete application in a format that will allow our customer to continue to manage the application. So in future, if we have a change in the structure, they can change it. If we have new business rules that they want to implement, we can implement them.
So one thing we saw with this is that most often people don't know what they have in the application. By representing the code in a model and trying to mix it with industry standards, then you can see possibilities that were not even conceived before. So it's a physical representation of the code that you saw that you need to understand COBOL to do it. Now you can take anyone that knows concepts to be able to do it.
Well, the problem
Right.
it's I want to say a problem. It's probably going to be an opportunity that will flip into a problem because there's a lot of business people that couldn't do what they wanted to do, and
Yeah.
now they're going to be able,
Yeah.
but it's going to be flipping
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
how do we materialize that?
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and do we do
Yeah.
it or not?
Exactly.
There's going to be a lot of
Yeah.
mitigation of change management and
Yes.
impact on consumers and impact on business.
Yes.
So you're just opening the door to really, and I'm gonna let you go because I'm gonna be more curious on how. My next question is the next step.
Yeah, you'll see after, okay?
How do you like it's
Sure. How do we transform that,
How
okay?
do we transform that? But I mean, I think the pivot point is there's gonna be a business owner that says, okay, let's go. We do it like that. And maybe there's gonna be I mean, the lift and shift is not gonna be maybe 100% of what it was. I mean,
It could be the same or it could be enhanced. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
You could take it as is,
business
or
guy
you could
was-
be opportunities to say, okay,
I mean,
now-
what we are
now
showing
since
here,
we're seeing
Antoine,
what it does, we can do this now
Yeah.
and extend it, but it's not necessary. We're just
what
showing
we
the
are showing here
possibility.
is in our opinion, a possibilities that we offer. But conceptually, there is no reason why we cannot take a thing called COBOL and generate a new application.
Yeah.
That will not make a bigger sense because this thing is called COBOL because it's a COBOL application. So if you have
Okay.
a target Java and you generate something called COBOL, the question is why?
But what about the dependencies between app? Let's say you run it.
APIs, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because in this generation, a lot of apps were
Yeah.
dependent in between.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's say you take a cluster,
Yeah.
but one was
Yeah.
left out.
So that's a good point. So usually, let's say if you have point-to-point integration, you would have the code from source to destination. There's an opportunity to take this code out and create an API. Because you have the model that you can do this, okay? That's the other thing. Because
That
you
is
see what the
exactly
code
what we
does.
do. So what we do is,
This is
you will
exactly
see
what we do.
in the next steps, we will now design so-called components. Components are based on API. So this is a simple application. So in this case, we only have one API. But what we will do in a real case is to have several APIs. So one of the aspects is we can port that one by one. So we don't have dependencies as soon we understand how we can keep them separated. But second, we can manage this API in different ways. So how is that we transform the API? So an API in this case is a REST API. It's expressed by JSON schemas. So, and this is now our PIM, is our platform independent model. But to create the API, we need to again transform that into another type of PSM that is the expression of what is a REST API. So we do that with a automation. You see here, we can take any type of domain class and transform into a schema. And then that is the result. So you see here, we have the present value and the loan. So those are our PIM classes. Another thing that we do, very, very important, Antoine, is we keep so-called traceability. Now, yesterday we were discussing about that in the sense of strategy, okay? And now we can do better strategy because our, fundamental, approach is if we keep everything from strategy to code generation to a model, you will know exactly which OCR or OKR is connected to this class. You simply go down the pipe and you will know exactly what is going on, okay? But in this case, what we are doing is, if you like, this is something that a data architect will do, and that is something that normally a solution architect or even a developer will do. But normally they are not directly related.
Just take a pause, okay? So if you look at the initial COBOL program, there were functions being called inside one program. So what Gio is saying is now those functions, they'll be extended outside of the main application and call outside functions to get the result that initial program was supposed to calculate. Okay, so we're breaking down this application into components, as GU has just seen.
I'm assuming that at this juncture, they're even available to others as well.
Yeah, no problem. As soon as you expose it out, then you can call the API and get access to it. Okay, So this is
Now-
where you break that monolith of an application into components, and then it forces you to rethink maybe instead of doing point to point to this application, then you would break this and call the API and start loosely couple your whole application portfolio.
Now, another thing that we do that was not part of the original application is, so you see, this is the class that defines the API, is connected with the two original functions, that is calculate loan and calculate present value. But we have added additional functions that are CRUD functions to manage the business object. So we can now create a loan, update a loan, delete a loan, have a list of all the loans, and so on. Okay. Now, all of that is defined as a REST API, and that is where we start, generating cool stuff. So that is how it works. So I'm here, the architect. I have this model of a PSM, represented API, and now we start another generator. This generator we create during the Pioneer Innovation Project, and what it does is take this model and transforming into a so-called Swagger. And here, this is a screenshot of the so-called Swagger editor. That is the industry standard to load the Swagger. And you see here, we have a loan management valid API with all the methods. Now,
so we validate the code generated into the Swagger program to make sure that the API is valid and respect the standards that you created.
So
Right.
when you say we validate, like,
It's because you go into we go into the tool to make sure that it's good, that it respect the standards. As let's say for a TM forum, there is specification for OpenAPI to follow. So we make sure that when we generate that code, it follows the instructions.
so we would need some sort of tech lead that do some
Yeah.
sort of code review. and-
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe I'm going too much in the weeds, but.
No, that's your meeting.
Within this workflow, let's say we generate the API, tested it within Azure DevOps, and how does it work? So you run all the tasks, and then there's PRs and some tech lead review those, or what's the workflow? I guess this.
really,
department-
what we are trying to do is to automate as much as possible. So to reduce the steps that are necessary in the workflow. Typically, because you see, this code is generated, so cannot be wrong. The only reason why it can be wrong is if you forgot to do certain things in the model. Okay, but the code itself is the result of the model. So as an example, you need to define like the version in the model. You see this thing here, like 24 is kind of small. Let me try to zoom in.
All right.
You see this is 24.
Well,
and
that's
then-
everybody at this meeting, but that's all right.
So if you forget to generate a valid version, the Swagger will complain, hey, you need a valid version. You need also to have an author and an email, of the author, things like that. But that is why we do this step. But in general, if you have a good discipline in creating, the correct model, you're going to be fine. Any other question before we continue?
Yeah, does it generate all the test cases? Well, maybe I'm asking too much.
We generate also the test cases, yes. But keep in mind, we are not yet so far. This is simply a text that define the specification for a API, okay? So, and that is also, by the way, when we say about flexibility, all the steps can be independent from each other. For example, right now, because we are recording it, I will not name, but we have a client that is interested to understand what is going on with their own code. In this case, we will simply do the initial part in which we digest the code, we import into the model, we analyze it. Okay, not necessarily the generation of new code. They only want to understand, okay, what is inside the box, because they have a lot of code. Okay, in certain other cases, like other clients and CSP we interact with, they are interested in generating APIs, and they are happy if they can simply generate the Swagger file, and then they have another workflow that will pass this, Swagger to their, regular developers. But in other cases, they are so interested to generate a complete application, and that is where, really get interesting. So what we do is we have another generator. So until now, you have seen at least 3 of them. So just to recap, the first one is the one that parse code and import into the model. The second one will transform a model into a Swagger file, and the third one will transform the Swagger file into a full functioning application. So, and
Je sais pas comment.
here you see, hello Pierre.
Hi.
Here you see
Sorry,
the result.
I'm just going to shoot that on the screen. Tu peux me fermer le t'es en full screen. You're going to take 2 seconds. I'm going to be able to. Okay, spot. Just give me 1 second here, Drew. Sorry for interrupting. Marc-André may actually join us in a few seconds, but not now.
Ah, je l'ai pas ouvert la TV.
While we're setting that up, first, congrats. I mean, coding all of that in 4 weeks.
No.
No, that is like 5 years of work.
5 years, okay.
But-
So you spin off what you did present to us last time, right?
So what
Pierre
we have
told me
done
it
in
was
the last
two-
5
2
weeks
weeks.
is we
No.
But
We
he
have-
was setting
we have
the stage,
developed-
right?
we have developed-
but
I'm just kidding.
additional stuff.
See, funny, Antoine, myself and Gio worked on the same application modernization at IBM
Mhm.
for several years. Gio was creating the code and I was a user using it with customers here in Montreal.
Okay.
So now this is the fruit of multiple stuff.
Mhm.
What's different with this is now the model is inside the tool.
Yeah.
That it's more available for people.
And it's no longer relying on IBM.
Exactly. No. It's the how would I say, the intellectual stuff that we're using
Okay.
and we're transforming into this
Okay.
approach.
It's not working, but that's okay.
Okay, go continue.
Okay, so here we have generated a complete working application.
You don't need to.
Je ne suis pas sûr de comprendre.
Okay, continue, Ju.
You're dead off.
Okay,
Continue,
so
Ju.
we have generated a complete working application. So the important aspect of this application is that it's complying with the so-called ODA component specification. The ODA component specification is the branding name of the TM form for something called Open System Architecture. So Open System Architecture is a industry standard for a application that works in the cloud. So not only is not batch, but works in the cloud, is pluggable, and because everything works through API, can communicate with all the similar application independent from the technology. And that means our current, code base is based on Python, but fundamentally, if we build this with Python, and then we can communicate with anything else that follow the same standard. Now, a potential thing will be to, bring to another target language, but the reality is each company has its own, standard. So there is nothing like fit all. We will, in any case, need to adapt that. Now, the thing that I'm most proud of is this. So you remember that originally we have some calculation in COBOL, okay? And we extracted the definition of the function in human readable language. And now we reuse exactly the same, description. We pass that description to the artificial intelligence and we say, hey, now generate the code, the valid code in the context. Another important thing with AI is providing context. In the context of the new application, generate new valid code for calculation of the loan. And that is the result. During the demo with AWS, we showed that this is a complete generated UI, by the way. So what is that we generate? We generate the REST API. We generate a high-performance asynchronous messaging for all those components to work together. We generate a so-called object relationship mapping. We generate a web application on the top of that. So this is a front end that communicates with the back end. And that is also another piece of UI that is generated and can do the calculation. Now,
So we
what
went
is
from a
missing?
batch application to an online application with APIs connected to it.
Now, what is missing, what I'm currently working on, and I did in the meanwhile very good progresses, is the definition of the deployment. Okay, so what we will have pretty soon is the ability also to completely model a definition of the target cloud and then to deploy this application in any cloud. Okay, that this a screenshot was made for AWS, but the reality is if anybody use like Google Cloud, Azure, or anything, we can deploy the application. So think about that, what we are talking about here. So you have the ability not only to complete model your application, but to deploy a working version of it directly in your cloud system. That can be private or public cloud, by the way. So that is the end of the presentation. So one thing again to keep in mind is application modernization is only a part of what we at Levio we would like to provide to our customers. And that means we can start with strategy and then helping the customer to do application modernization, or vice versa, do application modernization, go to strategy, and anything in between. We are talking we are talking like also to the people doing process discovery, because we want also to digest this. So the idea is we really have a system to connect business and technology together, and that will be a major differentiator of Levio. So this concludes my presentation. Any question?
Yeah, I've got many.
Which was expected.
Yeah, I think I'll put them all together. I think maybe one of the maybe two questions at the beginning of the workflow. Your LCA. What's the kind of input you can put in there? Is it only code, or is any type of asset can be put in there?
Conceptually, we could do any kind of asset, but you need to, when you work with a certain type of asset, you need to understand what is that you send. So not only for a ChatGPT, but also for the other part that is making sense of it. So for example, what we are doing here is we are looking for structure, behavior, and relationships. If you have a different type of asset, you will not do that. By the way, that is something that is pretty new. What I did is I use now a similar approach that can be very interesting in the future to send a image to artificial intelligence and get back the model. Like very often when we engage with clients, they have a lot of like Visio diagrams, and I hate them. Okay, and
well,
typically.
That's what I was asking, because what I had in mind is that, let's say you drop the code base, but you drop as well like architecture designs and other any business document, and then it takes a whole instead of just a code base in whatever language it is, and then it makes a different assessment.
You're completely right. Conceptually is right, but the issue is very often architectural design will not be the same as the code.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That is what we want to change, because today what happened is I am the architect. I create a bunch of Visio. Then there's some developer that will create completely different code, and nobody even know. So if you pass everything to the artificial intelligence, you will get very weird results. So we can do that, but we need to be careful. The real, porting of the application, the code is the documentation. Now, clearly, if you have a lot of...
we saw this with Frederic when we did process mining. So he can generate the BPMN, but when he compared with the original BPMN, there was discrepancies because sadly, the code evolved faster than the process. So to your point, we could, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be the same. It could
I think there are different
point.
use cases. There are different use cases. We want to help our clients to get a better version of their architecture in the model, because then they can use that version of the architecture to generate the new code, and then you have the alignment. But if you do application modernization, is 99% of the case that any type of documentation you have is not exactly mirroring the code.
So what's new with what we're proposing is we can generate documentation from the model, keeping the model and the documentation in sync. So as long as you update the model, you can generate the documentation and keep it alive. So that's the difference also.
And we can feed any type of documentation.
Word, Excel, PowerPoint, whatever. So you can do that. Because that's what GU did with TM Forum. All the documents we're receiving as members comes from the model. So all the PDFs are generated from the model. So every 3, 2, 4, 6 months, as they do change to the basic information, they regenerate that into PDF so that the
Not only
member gets.
PDF, we generate also
Yeah.
Excel, we
Yeah.
generate, anything. But just to give you an hint, the TM form every 6 months has another release, and each release is like 10,000 pages of documents. And previously, they had a lot of inconsistencies between all those documents because the documents were maintained, standalone. So it's extremely complicated to keep everything updated for the documentation. That is why documenting things by hand is not such a good idea because it's not scaling up.
GU, could you extract documentation from the code also?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so that's the other thing, because usually there's some documentation in the code. So you could extract that and put that with, let's say, either an element or a class that would, let's say,
But
bring
if you think
context.
about this, check this out. What is that you call this? That is a documentation, human readable documentation of two functions that are logical functions that were hidden into the code. Okay, now we can not only document that, but we can, for example, look at that and say, hey, we need to improve this function. Like we have a new requirement by the regulator to improve this because we need to check something else. Okay, and we can do that. So, and again, I want to be very, very open. This system works, but need to be tailored for each situation because each situation is different. So you cannot claim that it will work like this. Even COBOL is not the same as another COBOL. We know that, right? Or Java or any other language.
To your point, I think you're spot on, and that's part of my new role. And I think what I like from what you just showed is you're agnostic from any client or industry. We could take it and put it anywhere else.
Yeah, you can do banking, insurance, whatever.
And I'm gonna push it maybe a bit further, and this is my brain that works like that. I could even break it apart in smaller pieces and use it like just one part for one customer or one industry.
Yeah.
I can spin it off like multiple ways, but the most important part, and that's where we are going with all product, it needs to be working.
Even the dev teams. So let's say we work with a customer and we need to start from the current application. We could parse that application to understand faster what the application does, and then ingest what the changes could be applied to the applications with this. So that would accelerate instead of having to go through documents and stuff, see what's inside the application and use it internally for our own purpose.
Business logic, business rules.
Exactly, stuff like that. Yeah.
Exactly. And then it becomes accelerators for all the upcoming.
But again, the others will do that. The magic here is the model at the center. If you have an industry model at the center, the thing will recognize this as, oh, this is a function. It's not perfectly in line with the standard, but here's what it does. And if you want to bring it in line with the standards, here it is. And here's standard APIs that will be able to connect to it once modernized and stuff like that. I mean, this
and what it gives to business leaders is a keep or leave. So basically, you only have decision to make.
Yeah.
You watch the output, and you only have keep or leave. You take the decision.
And many. If I look at the insurance, they have legacy applications that they're still good. There's no business case to replace them, but there could be a business case to modernize them. And this is where you get out of this.
That's one thing I've been advocating for like the last 5 or 6 years is there's a lot of legacy that you don't need, but you're still holding because you cannot like pick and choose. We could be the cleaner of a lot of
Yes, yes, and the only reason why this application is not valid anymore is because the technology or the people that knows that application, they're not around anymore. But all that knowledge is still valid. And if you want to modernize and do digital, you can break that application into pieces and do something different with it.
Did you talk about the concept of components in telecom?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, it's,
Now there are two aspects, guys, that we need to acknowledge. There are two things that Levio need to think about. Number one, skill set. This type of project requires a certain skill set, and I am almost 30 years in consulting. The approach of, oh, we first get the project and then we think who's sending a project is not going to work with that. So we need to start thinking about how we can communicate this knowledge within Levio. The second aspect is industry standards. For credibility's sake, but also for the sake of this system, we need to start thinking about becoming part of as many industry bodies as possible, like we did with the TM Forum, starting with a dedicated industry that Levio is heavily involved into. For example, my understanding is finance is one of them. So we will need to be looking at buy-in or accord or anything like this.
And
Because
APQC for process and stuff like that.
exactly. And that will give us the credibility, but also legal access to those models. Because I have all of them, but I will not claim that, I can use them in a, business setting.
Yeah.
I acquired them
That was,
in the years.
That was my next question. I wouldn't say hurdles or blockers, but there's going to be questions every first customers
Yes.
in every industry. There's
Yes.
enforcement, security,
Yeah, regulation and stuff like that. Yeah.
I need on-prem.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
need to
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's going to be a bunch
Yeah.
of those. So
Yeah.
if you can keep me in the loop with all of these, it's actually going to be shaping the product as we
Yeah.
build it. I've probably have 100 more questions. So I'll stop here, but if you can share the presentation.
Yes.
I mean, we have still 15 minutes. If you have any other question, I don't have anything better to do than answer your question.
No, well, I think for me, the other questions falls into the next steps. I've overheard your discussion about with Remy, so with regards to Shred and
Yes. Yes. So I'm working on the credit now for what we have built already. And that credit's gonna be composed of two pieces. First is what we're doing for TM Forum, which we have built and we're using with AWS now, and the application modernization piece that it's the effect of the work that we have done with TM Forum that allows us to do, as you can see, we reuse a lot of the stuff, but to extend that to other stuff.
Yeah, perfect. There's going to be other form of incentive. We're working probably, McCollum told you, I'm on the subject with probably we're going to be hiring a new firm to help us. And what I'm going to be tapping into is also the go-to-market incentive, which we haven't used in the past few years.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot there as well. So every action, I'll need to be in touch with every action so we can package it and know exactly what we can.
So what's missing right now, it's the sexy marketing material that will have customer bite. Because there's going to be skeptical. What we're seeing, myself and GU, is like we see a lot of deer on the road. It's like we're talking about this, like, fuck, what are you talking about? It's too risky. It's too. So we need to dummy it down. That's my term. So that when we go and engage with customers, we hit the pain points that they do have, and that would be the offer.
Yeah, we need to, I think we need to put the right words on the value prop. I think it goes beyond just a one pager and
No, exactly.
It's really a matter of having the right sales pitch and the tone to, because it could look scary from.
But every situation is going to be different. Like right now, we have It's not, there's no ink dry at the bottom of the piece of paper, but we're supposed to get an interesting mandate from Telesat. And they're launching, I told you, they're launching low orbit satellites, and they have asked us, because they're afraid that they're going to be in a bunch of CRs with their supplier, their software supplier, and they basically said, well, come and audit our architecture and come and audit our governance process for the program. Okay, so it's a nice 5 weeks engagement, very well paid.